Hello, my dear friends. In this video, we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's get started. First, we're going to talk about the potential peace agreements that might be signed between Russia and Ukraine in the near future. As you know, there has been a lot of talk about ceasefires and draft agreements. Donald Trump stated that he would finish this war within the next 100 days. He mentioned focusing on oil and lowering oil prices. However, Russia says it hasn't seen any movements in this direction yet, as there are still many unresolved issues. For example, Zelensky must conduct another presidential election on Ukrainian territory, among many other things. It's highly unlikely that both the Russian and Ukrainian sides, as well as Western countries, will be able to resolve all of these issues within 100 days. Furthermore, the Russians will continue their offensive operations during this time. To begin the peace process, a ceasefire lasting at least 100 days is necessary just to have time to complete these steps. But the main issue no one can agree on is the presence of military forces to enforce the ceasefire. For example, the Russians say that peacekeepers arriving in Ukraine without the consent of the Russian Federation will become military targets. They emphasize that they will not accept the presence of any foreign troops along the combat line. On the other hand, Ukrainians argue that they cannot accept peace without troops along the front lines, specifically US, Western, and European forces. They say they will continue fighting until they receive such an agreement. The Russians claim they cannot trust Western countries because, in 2015, when the Minsk agreements were signed, the West, including the former German Chancellor, said those agreements were merely a formality with no intention to follow through. The West used the agreements only to rearm Ukraine in preparation for a larger conflict, and now we see the consequences of that bigger war. Ukraine is on the brink of defeat, suffering significant losses, and no one knows what comes next. Moreover, Western countries do not plan to rebuild Ukraine after the war. So, many questions remain, including who will rebuild Ukraine after the war. Russia, for its part, will never do this unless it controls all of Ukraine's territory. While they could help rebuild Ukraine under such control, the Western countries will not do so. Ukraine wants peacekeepers along the front line, but Russia says if there are peacekeepers, then Ukraine will respond in kind, and Western countries will continue arming Ukraine with the goal of preparing for another war in 10 to 30 years. But who knows what the situation will be? Maybe in the next 10 years, Russia won't be in a position to carry out another war. No one knows for sure, and everyone wants to resolve this situation now and live in peace for hundreds of years, not just a few decades. Today, we also received a significant statement from Ukraine's second highest official, Andriy Yermak, head of the Ukrainian presidential administration. He said that, in reality, there are no peace plans for a settlement within 100 days. Another important statement came from Kyrylo Budanov, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, who stated that Ukraine might cease to exist if serious negotiations do not take place by summer. And when talking about summer, we are not referring to something that will happen in hundreds of years or even next year. This is something that could happen in just 2 or 3 months because, in that time, we will start seeing the processes that could lead to the complete erasure of Ukraine from the map. It could happen even tomorrow. This situation is very difficult, but currently, nobody is willing to compromise, which is very important. Russia will never accept compromises because they are winning. They are advancing along the line of combat contact, and they are about to enter the Neo region. After that, Russia will likely make more demands in the peace process. When talking about the United States, we see that under the Trump administration, they are doing everything they can to avoid this conflict. They want to get to the line of combat contact and eventually move towards the border with Mexico. They've made many statements saying that Zelensky is panicking, trying to insult him, and trying to ruin the situation. We've received reports that the US has been instructed to suspend all projects and expenses in Ukraine. There are many issues at hand, and further, we see that the United States is trying to normalize relations not just with Russia but also with Belarus. Today, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced that Belarus has released a U.S. citizen who had been in custody. This indicates that relations between the U.S., Russia, and Belarus may be improving. We also see that the processes now are not aimed at worsening relations between Russia and the Western countries but rather at normalizing them. There are more problems that Europe is going to face under the Trump administration, which presents many interesting developments. Probably the most important development from the European Union is that European countries cannot prolong sanctions against Russia. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán blocked a statement from the EU condemning the elections in Belarus, and he also blocked the next round of sanctions. This is a significant development. As for the situation on the ground, we see that the Russians are advancing, but Ukraine has continued its preparations for what is likely the final or last offensive operation, which will probably take place in the same area in the K's direction. For example, today, Russian sources published details of the consequences of a Ukrainian HIMARS attack deep inside Russian territory. The video shows that a temporary deployment point or headquarters of the Russian armed forces was destroyed as a result of the strike. While this does not help stabilize the situation, it is another small escalation. Additionally, the Russians reported that the Ukrainians attempted to attack Russia by bringing additional forces to the line of combat contact and the border. However, those forces were discovered by the Russians and destroyed. Regarding the ceasefire and peace agreements, there are questions about the Sudzha direction. Russia will not accept the continued Ukrainian presence in this area and will demand that Ukraine abandon these territories. Of course, the Ukrainians will try to hold onto these areas for as long as possible, trying to extract the highest price they can for them. They may try to exchange these territories for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant or something else, but this would not be acceptable to Russia. As for the situation in the direction itself, during the past 24 hours, we have not received any updates indicating changes on the ground. Now, let's move forward and discuss the situation in the Donetsk area. During the past 24 hours, the main activities took place near the city of Luhansk. The Russians brought a significant number of FPV drones with fiber optics and gained control over certain territories. Despite the rumors and talks about negotiations, the Russians are regrouping in preparation for further offensive operations in this area. The Russians understand that, sooner or later, a ceasefire agreement will be signed, so they are aiming to secure as much territory as possible. As for the Chavar direction, according to the information we have, during the past 24 hours, the Russians managed to secure the forest to the south of the settlement of Mikro, district of No. This information was provided to us by pro-Russian resources. As of now, without negotiations, different mappers have adjusted their maps in Russia's favor, so this is the situation in this area. According to various sources, the Russians managed to take control of this forest, and we have updated this contested area on the map. Now, let's discuss the situation in the city of TSK. The Russians, during the previous days, were attacking Ukrainian forces in the mine of Tetka. We were counting the days before the battle or siege of TSK would finish, but now we see that the Ukrainians most likely managed to counterattack the Russian units here. As a result of this counteroffensive, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the northern part of the city of TSK, including the ton of mine number 12. In this video, we can see a group of Ukrainian vehicles entering the northern part of the city of TSK. The Ukrainians landed infantry in this area and took control of several buildings, along with many prisoners of war. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in favor of Ukraine, so this is the current situation. Now, the Russians need to start everything from the beginning, at least in the northern part of the city of TSK. We expect that most likely, today or tomorrow, the Russians will announce the end of this battle. As for the city of Pakro, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything significant. Several sources reported that the Russians are continuing to advance in the western direction, trying to improve their positions between Odash and the settlement of Kotland, but there have been no changes to the situation. Very interesting details are coming from the Andreeva fortified area. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources published a very interesting map. We see an island of Russian presence in the northeastern part of Andreeva, followed by a huge gap and a significant gray zone, a contested area. Then once again, we see Russian territory. The Ukrainians are claiming that the Russians managed to complete a very interesting and special operation, and the main purpose of this operation was to secure the T-515 road. The goal was to dig in deeper in this area and hold the lines until the main Russian forces could move behind them using the same road. The main purpose of the attack in this area was to hold the lines and cut off these territories from the main supply and support lines. Currently, there are heavy clashes, so let's wait and see what will happen next. Regarding the settlement of DNA, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received any information confirming additional progress on the ground. I remind you that several days ago, defense sources reported that the Russians entered the settlement of DNA from the north and south, but for now, there have been no changes. As for the settlement of Vasova, the Russians continue to celebrate their victory. We continue to receive different videos from various parts of the settlement, showing how the Russians raised the flag and announced their victory. The battle for Vasova was very important for the Russians, and now that they have entered the operational space, they can develop their offensive operations further in different directions. The Ukrainians likely realize that their main defense line has collapsed and understand that they might not be able to stop the Russians anymore. The tempo and the territories taken by the Russians will continue to increase from day to day, and it's obviously time to begin the negotiation process. Furthermore, during the previous night, the Russians attacked Ukraine with a significant number of drones, which could indicate that in the very near future, Russia will launch a massive missile strike across the entire territory of Ukraine in response to Ukraine's attacks deep inside Russian territory using Western weapons. This is also a response to Ukraine's attack on Russian oil and fuel facilities deep inside Russian territory. Anyway, the next few days are going to be very interesting, so let's wait and see what happens next.